reporting isn't just parroting what somebody said to you, right? Like, so if you just take the press release and say, this is it, that's not reporting. Reporting has to be, talking to those people, talking to other people that have a different opinion on that, that all that kind of stuff. And I think, so yeah, in general, I think that that's a problem, but I also have, I think, a different perspective because of, my position, what I do and where I came from. I'm doing science journalism specifically for science publications, like my articles don't go into the newspaper or, like that, those sort of broad, publications. My articles go into science specific magazines, right? Or science specific websites. And so there, I think you would probably find less of that copy pasting, I use press releases a lot, but I generally use them to find the story, and then I go talk to those people. For some stories, for some like short news stories, you use the quotes directly from, but that's fine. That's what they're there for. You're supposed to use the quotes from the people in there, but then you generally talk to other people. So the copy pasting thing is not good, but I also understand why it happens, I think, because again, if you're a trained journalist, not a trained scientist, you're going to read that press release and you may or may not understand what's going on in that story. And that's a failure of science communication, or just the nature of some of the stuff, that not everybody can be an expert in everything. Some of this stuff gets kind of complicated, right? And so without the time, if you don't have the initial expertise to really grasp what that press release is about, what the unique angles are, where you can make criticisms or where you can look to find, alternative sources, that kind of thing, then you're left to just, you either have to do that work, that legwork of like going and finding those people, if you don't initially have that knowledge. And reporters at a local newspaper, at a provincial newspaper, at a national newspaper, they don't have that. They don't have that time. Like, it's not. And I think it's interesting because you're studying this during the pandemic. I was surprised when I looked through the data, your paper and stuff, how many press releases actually made it to the news. And I wonder if it's a consequence of the time of the pandemic, right? Where it's like, and maybe, I don't know if you have the numbers, like how were all of those press releases pandemic related? Because I would wonder on a, like, outside of a pandemic, if that many press releases got into the news.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I actually coded for that. I have to look at the exact numbers, but I remember not every press release was about COVID, and or didn't even mention COVID or a synonym. And also an interesting finding was that it was not necessarily the case that I have found it. All the press releases mentioned COVID in 61% of the cases. So it's not. It's like more than half mentioned COVID, but not overwhelming. No, indeed. Yeah. And the interesting thing was that there was no significant difference in the selection of a press release based on the fact that it mentioned COVID or not. So if you mentioned COVID, it didn't increase the chance of it becoming a news article, which was interesting. But this doesn't mean that COVID didn't have anything to do with it, because it was different time back then. It's like journalists had to stay. Well, they were allowed to go outside here in Belgium, but it was a lot of desk work, which I completely understand. And then if you get a lot of press releases, I can imagine that due to the situation, you just use them because you don't have the time, the resources, and the availability of people was also lower, I think. We could call them, but they were all, I think scientists were also trying to work with the environment they had, or within the environment they had. So I think the context did indeed increase the amount of copy pasting, but I can't. I don't have numbers for that because it's hard. It's almost impossible to test because it was the context, the societal context. You can't really control for that, but you have to be mindful of that. I think outside of a pandemic context, it will be lower. And I do have some literature saying that journalism is increasing throughout the years, and the copy pasting is increasing throughout the years.